Hey friends, it's that time again. Welcome to AI Next, and in today's session, we're going to sit down with a good friend, Jason Malec. Welcome, Jason. How you doing?
Thank you. Though I am standing, I hope that's okay, Kenny.
For those of you who don't know Jason's work, he helps organizations accelerate their mission by basically, I think, streamlining objective strategies, storytelling, basically putting the house in order so that the rest of your organization can have the maximum impact. And I've seen him do that work over and over again in different organizations, whether it's at Northpoint Ministries, American Bible Society, Living on the Edge, Explore God, and also at Gloo. And one of the things that he's working on right now is Gloo AI, which is an AI powered platform that's, I believe, trying to become a trusted source for people who want to pursue spiritual growth. Jason, did I get that correct? How,
Oh,
how,
come
how
on.
would you describe it?
I'm putting you on the road to market for what we're doing. That's absolutely right. Yeah, artificial intelligence today is it's the Wild West, right? There's so much going on and there's very little regulation. And so one thing we realize, in particular for the faith oriented community, is that we're not sure what we can trust, who we can trust, what platforms out there we can trust. And so we're very intentionally curating a faith forward, scripturally based content asset library, if you will, and then helping to create what we call a kingdom aligned large language model that hopefully serves a faith community in really profound ways going forward.
Um, the thought leadership you have in this area, I just love to engage every single time that we actually get together. And so there's been some thinking on your side, I think, that you've done to contribute to the community. And we've actually published an article where you've outlined something that you're calling our Napster moment. So if you're watching or listening in today, head over to exponential.org/AI next, and you can see the article that Jason has written about basically the future of digital rights and media. And there's a specific angle of approach that you are actually positing here in terms of what is AI's role in all of this, right? And so, can you just give us a 10,000 foot overview of how you're seeing AI's reshaping content creation and specifically distribution today?
Yeah, of course. And I should say, first of all, a lot of this thinking was prompted and really encouraged by Mary McCurdy at the Atlantic
Mhm.
magazine. She is the chief strategist there. So she and I, in dialogue about some of the work that we're doing, really helped to explore some of these thoughts. So thanks, Mary Liz. Great work. So I think, Kenny, as you know, large language models are these gigantic collections of data that have essentially been trained and then use a technology to create generative content
Yeah.
based on the data sources that they have. And what many of us didn't know and perhaps are just now coming to learn is that those data sources on which these large language models have been trained and are being trained have been essentially scraped from and ingested from the internet. So there's obviously lots and lots and lots of publicly available information on the web. And what these large language models have done is essentially crawled the web and identified as much information as they possibly can. So much of that is, of course, publicly available intellectual property. Anything that's out there can presumably be scraped and ingested and used
Mm.
for training purposes. But what a lot of what we're learning is that these large language models have also ingested proprietary information, and that is intellectual property that prior to the advent of this type of technology was protected under copyright laws. What's interesting, Kenny, is that if you read and study some of the litigations that are happening, and that is happening, there are publishers and large journalism organizations, as large as News Corp that are suing a lot of these large language models. And I love this. This is so interesting to study the law cases because the principle or the defense of the large language models is based on this. If you imagine you and I are reading a website, you and I could actually scan our eyes over, say a book
Yeah.
online, something that we've seen kind of the look inside. And if we had a photographic memory, we could literally memorize every single element of that book. The case that's being made, and this is obviously an oversimplification, case that's being made is large language models are no different than Kenny Jang, who has a photographic
Yeah.
memory and reads this online and remembers this data. And what's interesting is they actually have a pretty good case. And so there's, again, a lot of this is tied up, but it's a fascinating, fascinating moment. And maybe to answer your question, we're flipping that model. We want to get consent from intellectual property holders.
Yeah.
We want to give them control, and we want to be able to compensate them based on their content creation. So that's what we're doing at Gloo AI.
So let's talk about what pastors are concerned about in terms of content, right? So sermons, worship music, even visual media as all these AI models go multimodal, right? And Sora has
Mhm.
just come out with producing fantastic video based on its database, etc. How do you see AI impacting the way churches create and distribute content? Like, or maybe back up. What are the concerns that a pastor, what are the questions that a pastor should be asking
Mhm.
about the content that the church and ministry actually produces right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a really important question for people of faith to answer. I would say that the primary concern, and I just talked about consent and control and
Yeah,
compensation. Those three, I would argue, probably are not top of mind for the majority of pastors, and here's why. I'm a pastor myself, and I'll be honest, I don't care who has access to my sermon, whether it's my
exactly.
manuscript, my video. I want that to go far and wide. But here's what I do care about. When my content is ingested or used to train a large language model, there's zero control over what happens. And as a result, the integrity of my sermon, its original intent, how I went about crafting that, how I delivered it, etc., the integrity of that asset, if you want to call it that, the sermon, is lost. There's zero control over what happens. And as a result, because of the commingling of my asset, my data, my sermon, with quite literally trillions and trillions and trillions of other assets, once those are commingled, they're essentially destructured or
Mhm.
decomposed, if you will, and used to generate new content. And because of that, we have no idea what comes out the other end in that generated source or asset.
So do you feel like this is more of a technical challenge or a moral one?
Morals and ethics are obviously
Yeah,
commingled, and technology increasingly today has, enormous moral or at least ethical inputs and consequences. I believe it clearly is a technical challenge. So if you and I were to do an assessment of, say, the five largest large language models today, and an assessment on the quality of the experience, in particular on faith outputs, generative outputs, or even on moral or ethical generative outputs, there's variation between their outputs. I could show you a graph. We've done a very, very deep study on that, and some are better than others. Those that underperform pretty catastrophically, and those that are average are just that. They're average. There aren't any that are performing at an exceptional level where I think you or I, or maybe most of your listeners, would be satisfied or content. We certainly wouldn't celebrate it. And so that certainly evokes theological issues, and I would argue even moral, ethical, and certainly technological concerns as well.
So in that article that you've written, you make a parallel between what's happening with AI right now and that Napster chapter of life in terms of
Mhm.
DRM. Um, if you looked into your crystal ball and just be prophetic for a moment, what do you think is going to happen? What is going to be the future in terms of all of this media that's being consumed by these large language models, being pulled apart, vectorized, etc.? Is the cat out of the bag? Is it too late, or do you actually think there are um, sensible solutions that actually are practically able to be achieved at this point?
Yeah, that's I think that is a really important question, and I think the answer is yes. And maybe to revisit that Napster moment
Yeah,
that you referred to, 1999, Napster came out. Digital technology was a somewhat novel thing. We were beginning to learn what an MP3 was. You probably remember those days, Kenny. MP3s was a bits and bytes that captured audio waves
yeah.
that we could then take from our computer and project through speakers. That was kind of new technology. It seems, if you're not if you're young enough to not remember the Napster moment, you're probably thinking I'm an old fogey, which perhaps I am. But that was a really important moment because that technology uh, de-encrypted sonic waves that allowed anybody to take them anywhere they want without any kind of restriction. Prior to that, you and I had to walk to, here in Atlanta, the Turtles store to go buy my, $10 12 song album CD at the time. So that was an important moment, and it took 3 to 5 years for, I think at the time, Pandora and Apple Computer to develop the technology and eventually the platform that both wrapped those MP3s in digital rights management, basically a security protocol that did not permit those MP3s to be exchanged unethically or without compensation to its owner. And so at the time, I was able to blow up the old album, the record, kind of concept, and buy these songs for 99 cents. You remember that moment? And over time, that evolved, right? And now we're streaming music and we're paying artists based on, streams and et cetera. My guess is we're in the exact same scenario, probably between 1999 and 2003, 4. But rather than MP3s being the media form, it's all media. It's
Hmm.
video, it's audio, it's obviously podcast, it's anything written. So if you're a publisher, if you're an artist, if you're a creator, your content almost definitely has been used to train a large language model without your consent. And I think we're in the moment where we're waiting for what that protocol is, that digital rights management protocol. And then two, we're waiting for the platform that honors and connects the creator with the consumer, that allows the creator to be acknowledged, to be accredited with their creation. We have yet to see that platform, and at Gloo, we're actually trying to build that right now. That gives control to the creator, that honors them, that gives them compensation for those that are monetizing their intellectual property. So our hope is that we can create, at least for the faith community, a platform that does that, connects the creator and the consumer in a way that allows them to exchange value in an ethical and fair way.
Tell me about the platform that you guys are working on, right? Because you mentioned this need for a new platform that protects creators' rights, that's flexible and practical, like iTunes, what it did for music, etc. What does that look like for faith content? Can you just give us some concrete details of the projects that you guys are working on?
Yeah, I would say there's a handful of maybe principles that inform what we're doing. The first is we actually enrich content in ways that makes it exponentially more discoverable. And so, if you and I, if you think back to the iTunes kind of evolution of the music industry, you and I had to know either the artist, the genre, or the specific song in order to, kind of extract what it is that we were looking for. What we're trying to do is add enormous volumes of metadata to all content that makes it exponentially more discoverable. We want to make our artists, our creators, our writers, our podcasters, our videographers, our producers. We want to make their content infinitely or at least exponentially more discoverable than they are today. So that's step one. Step two is creating a platform that again empowers and gives control or returns control, if you will, to the creator. The creator ultimately gets to determine who sees their content, in what format, how much do they see it, and to whom is it distributed. So we're creating a platform that returns that control. So then if you look at it from the consumer's perspective, we also want to empower the consumer to surface resources that they're interested in. And so they also have power to turn on and off sources that are going to be surfaced in artificial intelligence or generative searches. And so it's really kind of a two-part or two-sided ecosystem, if you will. It's a really, really cool technology.
Um, when is it going to be available to the general public?
Yeah, so the technology stack, which includes both the curated content, the enriched curated content, as well as the technology stack that sits under that and powers it, that's available today. And so we are partnering with content creators and helping to protect their content and distribute it in obviously ethical ways with their permission and consent. So that's available today. You can go to ai.gloo.us to get more information. You can get a demo about that, et cetera. And then the consumer-facing application is called Aspen, and that'll be available in January. We're going to launch a very aggressive marketing campaign to onboard as many kind of customer-facing, well, customers, if you will, beginning in January. So again, that'll be available in all the app stores for download.
So, Jason, I've got this next logical step in terms of what's happening in my mind. We have the tools that you guys are offering, and I think that's something that every ministry needs to investigate. But at some point, the scope of the work at hand is going to be beyond what the purpose of your tools are or other Christian informed tools are. And we're seeing on a daily basis that all the products that we're using are integrating AI into it. And so, what would you say to a pastor that wants to steward all of this properly and wants to then invoke some fair use and all their employees, their staff, their volunteers? What would you say to them? Is like, how do they go forward and use these platforms in ways that align with that biblical mandate for how to use these things properly, respecting the rights, etc. Do you have any suggestions for those approaches?
Hmm. I love that question. I think that's a really, really important question for all of us to wrestle with, especially people in places of leadership or influence. If you're speaking to an audience about technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, having principles or guidelines that inform those, how we speak about it, our worldview and our recommendations is absolutely critical. And in fact, even though I'm a part of the Gloo AI team, I'd love to promote some of the things we're doing. The principles that hopefully are going to guide how we think. I don't care whether it's Gloo
Yeah.
AI or some other tools that you're using, those principles should guide us. They should be the worldview and the kind of use, guidelines for how we do what we do. But one of the things, and I would say this is true for those of us who are followers of Jesus and want to build, want to be a part of leveraging redemptive tools and maybe even building redemptive tools. The principles that I think are important, and I write about these in the article, is number one, we want to get consent. Anytime we are going to be using somebody else's IP, we want to get consent from them. We don't want to take that without permission. Number two, for those in particular who are monetizing, we want to be able to compensate them. Those who are making a living based on creating, we want to be able to honor that creative expression that God has given them. Third, we want to empower folks through control. We want to ensure that they determine, where their content goes, who sees it, in what format, et cetera. Fourth, we want to provide credit anytime that somebody's content is utilized, again, audio, video, print, otherwise. we want to ensure that they receive attribution or credit for that use. Fifth, we're going to be totally clear. I believe we, followers of Jesus, should be totally clear or transparent in what we're doing, how we're doing it, the technology we're using, etc. And then lastly, and this obviously applies to the faith community, we want to have confidence in the generative responses that we're seeing and hopefully responsible for. And that is, if we're talking about faith, we want to ensure that we're generating orthodox, faith-filled responses. And so, at least for the pastor who's preaching or the pastor who's talking about or endorsing use of artificial intelligence, I hope they would, really lean hard into credit and clarity, if not all six of those principles, meaning we got to give attribution to the content
Yeah.
owner, the creator, and we have to be clear about the tools and resources that we're using. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Um, as we go forward in this AI age, what encouragement would you give to pastors who feel intimidated by technology but want to be a part of the moment?
Well, a couple of things. There are some thought leaders who are helping to cast vision, to invite us to be careful, to introduce us to tools that we should be thinking about, if not using ourselves. Kenny, obviously you spent a lot of time really researching on my behalf, on our behalf, what's going on in the world of technology and communication for the pastor, for the church. Jeremy Utley is a pastor he's a professor at Stanford University. He's doing a lot of work to help us, people of faith. He, as a professor at Stanford in innovation and artificial intelligence, I think, is doing a lot of work. So I would say subscribe to the newsletters, follow those thought leaders who are people of faith who are helping us think. And then lastly, and this, I hope this isn't too provocative. I'm 53 years old. I've got a 23-year-old daughter who works in the advertising industry. She is working so hard to stay up to date in what's going on and probably knows as much, if not more, than I do about what's happening. I'm spending a lot of time talking to younger generations to learn and honestly help them have a theological or at least an ethical lens through which to evaluate these tools, but also learn from them and understand what's important to them. What are the tools that they're paying attention to, and what's its application in my context and in the broader church, big C at large.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. As we close out the conversation, looking ahead, what gives you hope about the intersection of technology, creativity, and faith in this next chapter of our AI-driven world?
Well, I think the first statement I'd make is that God is not surprised by artificial intelligence. That, if we look at the last year, 12 months worth of pastoral reaction to artificial intelligence, it's interesting that the more one is educated about what it is and how it works, the more open to, if not embracing of, AI that we have become just over 12 months. Now, that's not a reason to embrace, technology, or in this case, artificial intelligence. But I think education really helps us see the opportunity. So, I would say God's not surprised by this. I think we, people of faith, need to be catalysts of redemptive solutions in utilizing technology, or said maybe more simply, we need to be catalysts of redemptive technology. We should be on the front, leading the way, and helping to identify, build, leverage tools that ultimately brings glory to God and maybe even cast vision to the broader world at large. And so I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us to leverage this technology. And I'll provide perhaps a third point, and that is those who are involved in evangelism or discipleship or church planting, or, fill in the blank with all the various expressions of God's kingdom through his body of Christ on earth. There are so many applications and uses
Yeah.
of this technology to accelerate God's work in each of those various areas, I would say again, we need to be the people on the front line who are defining ways to do what God's called us, empowered us, gifted us to do using these new ways of communicating.
Love that. A word of hope. Let's close out with a fun segment we call the lightning rounds. Of just some fast questions. Don't think too much. We got 4 questions for you, Jason, if you're ready.
Yep.
Here we
Yep.
go. What is one recent way that you've used an AI chatbot for non-work related stuff? What's the one recent way that you've actually used ChatGPT, Claude, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm a ChatGPT audio fan, and the I think the most interesting way, this was a Jeremy Utley hat tip. He was the advocate of it. I spend a lot of time debriefing thoughts, ideas with ChatGPT 4.0, and it really helps me kind of distill my ideas and even prepare new ways of thinking about how I'm engaging with either people or strategies or organizations. It's been really
I love
helpful.
it. I love it. Yeah, ChatGPT on the mobile phone with the advanced voice mode, and now they
That's
just
right.
announced that you can actually have
Video.
video, and
Mhm.
it will see and respond to what you're doing as well. I just love that tool.
Yep.
Next question is, what is the latest and greatest AI service or app that's on your radar that either you have a trial account for, or you want to dive into, or what's caught your eye in terms of the latest shiny object in the AI world?
Yeah, this one isn't terribly new, although in today's day and age, this could be like old news. But Notebook LM has a really interesting podcast creator. I uploaded one of my sermon transcripts probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I sent the output, the MP3 output, to my wife without any kind of precursor, and just said, "Hey, listen to this." It was a podcast between a guy and a girl. Now it could have been my voice if I had trained Notebook LM on my voice, but it wasn't. So it was just a dummy avatar guy and a girl, and they dialogued for 24 minutes about my sermon. And it wasn't maybe 5 minutes until my wife came storming into my room and said, "Somebody's doing a podcast about your sermon." And then she thought it was real. She thought it was real. My daughter came home and my wife said, "Hey, listen to this." And they both were like, "That's Dad's sermon, isn't it? That's really interesting." What's interesting, most interesting to me, is my wife turned it off after telling my daughter that's actually AI generated. Turned it off. My daughter said, "Turn it back on." 23-year-old. She said, "No offense to Dad, that's way more interesting
Yes.
than a talking head sermon." Think about that. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Notebook LM is an amazing tool, and it's just getting started, right? Like we always
Yeah,
say, like, hey, today's AI tool is the worst version of AI that we'll use in your lifetime, and so
yeah,
we're just
yeah.
looking forward to improving that. Okay, the next question is, we are headed toward something we call the singularity and AGI, artificial general intelligence, when the machine will be smarter than man. What year do you think that will happen? We've had estimates from AI scientists out there that say it's 20 years from now, 15 years from now. Even Sam Altman from OpenAI said it's going to happen within this next year. What's your prediction? What year on the calendar should we put down for you, Jason Malec?
Well, first of all, you declared that we are heading toward it. Remember, it's speculative at this point.
Yes.
That said, Ray Kurzweil predicted probably 15 years ago that 2025 was the year that it would happen. You've heard, obviously, Sam Altman predict the same. AGI, stepping back from your question, AGI implies that computers can process not just in one vertical of life, in other words, answer a question
Yes.
or create music or create a video or whatever. And those are kind of vertical expressions or uses of artificial intelligence. AGI implies all of them aggregated functionally into one, you know, a false or virtually sentient being, that they will be able to excel or exceed human capacity to think and process. The reality is we are so close to that. Now, probably a year, 2, 3, something like that. So I'm guessing in the next 2 to 3 years. I'll say 2026. I'm probably not as bullish as Sam Altman. Now, the implications of that, I don't know if you want to go into that, but that's an interesting question.
Yes, that's a conversation for another day, and we got to do it
Yeah.
before 2026 or 27.
That's
Okay.
right.
Last question for you is, hey, where can people follow you? You've got a lot of thought leadership coming out. Where can they actually learn more about it or connect with you directly? How can people learn more about Jason Malec?
Thank you for asking, Kenny. I'm candidly, Kenny and I just talked about this. I'm not huge on social media, but my main presence is on LinkedIn. I'm considering jumping onto X, and so if those out there are interested, certainly let me know. I'd love to hear what the values are. Kenny's also a huge advocate of Facebook groups, so kicking the tires on that. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the primary expression of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Jason. We'll have to have you back again. Everybody, if you want to go a little bit deeper, a reminder that if you go to exponential.org/AI-next, you'll be able to find Jason's long form article on the Napster moment and the principles that he talked about on our site. And if you are joining us for the first time, we just encourage you to check out everything else that AI Next has to offer. We want to equip you to go further with your ministry, and AI is here to help. I'm Kenny Jang. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.